Jadi, inilah cara bagaimana pemanasan global berlaku. Kalau kamu nak skor topik ni, tiada cara lain melainkan kamu hafal dan hafal. Faham?
Faham, cikgu.
Alah, simple je tajuk ni. Aku rasa aku boleh skor kalau aku ikut cara cikgu Zakuan mengajar, iaitu dengan cara menghafal botani, fisiologi, ekologi, mikrobiologi, genetik.
Aduh, Yai. Apa cikgu Zakuan ni ajar sebenarnya? Dari awal sampai habis. Tak faham. Dahlah bosan.
Ish, bosan betul lah cara cikgu Zakuan mengajar ni. Tengok students pun dah macam ke laut. Tak boleh jadi ni.
Cikgu Zakuan, ada masalah student tak dapat A dalam biologi? Cara pengajaran dan penyampaian terlalu mendata sehingga student dah bosan tengok awak?
Ya, saya pun masalah. Bantulah saya.
Tak perlu risau, kami ada untuk bantu awak. Jom join seminar kami.
Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. Have you taken your lunch yet? If you do, that's great. We want you to feel energized for today's seminar. I promise you for today's seminar will be great and entertaining for all of you. Okay? Before we proceed, can you imagine what kind of message or lesson from the previous video? If you do, it is about a teacher that lack of teaching skills that leads to boring classes. Have you ever experienced this kind of classroom before? So am I. Without further ado, let's proceed for today's seminar. So the title is Inquiry-Based Science Education, IBSE, and Problem-Based Learning, PBL, in Classroom. Before we begin, let me introduce you to the panel for today's seminar. The first one is Nur Aina Athirah, binti Juhari. Our second panel is Syuzwani binti Saidi. The third one is Siti Nur Nabilah binti Masromzi, followed by Zainey Azneyra binti Zainudin, and finally me, myself and I, Zakuan Aiman bin Radziyuddin. On the next slide, it will be explaining about the table of content for today's seminar. The first one is Inquiry-Based Science Education, which is IBSE, and the second one is Problem-Based Learning, which is PBL. Let me start this seminar by explaining to all of you about the definition and introduction of Inquiry-Based Science Education, IBSE. So what is IBSE actually is? IBSE, or also known as Inquiry-Based Science Education, it is an engaging way to learn sciences. It focuses on the interests of the student and encourage them for active learning by allowing them to undertake their own studies. IBSE is introduced in Malaysia since 1960. It is quite long ago, right? The third point is teacher urge student to perform a self-designed, interest-guided inquiry to answer their own research question in open IBSE. During this process, teachers play a crucial role in facilitating, assisting, and supervising their student. In simple words, teacher is the facilitator for their student. In this slide, the quotes summarize about what is IBSE actually is and what are the objectives in IBSE. So the quote is, children must be taught how to think, not what you think. So that is the definition of IBSE. Now let's move on to the characteristic of IBSE. The first one is to allow the student to investigate. In other words, students are engaged with a difficult problem or situation that is open-ended to such a degree that a variety of solutions and responses are conceivable, which means the responses are imaginable and acceptable. For example, the teachers want to conduct an experiment for their student, which is called capture-recapture experiment. The objective for the experiment is to study about the population of grasshopper. So, the teacher takes their student to the school field to catch some grasshopper. So, what they need to do is to capture and mark the grasshopper with a permanent marker on the grasshopper body. After a few days later, the student come back to the same field to catch the grasshopper and to see whether the grasshopper are marked with the same permanent marker. By conducting this experiment, which is capture-recapture process, there are some questions that will be asked from the student to the teachers, which is, what else might cause the amount of marked grasshopper in recapture process is lesser than capturing process? This type of question is what IBSE want for today's classroom. So, for example, the student build up their own question or find out the problem, and finally they will figure out what are the solutions to solve the problem. Let's move on to the second characteristic of IBSE, which is communicate. How communication helps the student to solve the problem? Let me tell you. Imagine in capture-recapture process, the student must think about how they want to catch the grasshopper, which is the best place to catch them. So, students draw upon their existing knowledge and they identify what their learning needs are. The third characteristic of IBSE is to allow the student to explore, which means the student have control over the direction of the inquiry and the methods or approaches that are taken. For example, after discussing with their friend about how to conduct the experiment, they finally explore and find the best answer to solve this problem, which is by using a net. This is because the net is the best instrument or tools to catch the grasshopper. After conducting recapturing process, what are the patterns they notice in recapturing process? Of course, the amount of marked grasshopper in recapture process is lesser than the amount of marked grasshopper in capture process earlier. This is because the different tasks stimulate curiosity in the student, which encourage them to continue to search for a new data or evidence. They can search for the data or evidence through their discussion with their friends or do some research with their teachers. The final characteristic of IBSE is to conclude. For example, the students are responsible for the data analysis of the evidence and also presenting evidence in an appropriate manner which defend their solution to their initial problem. How can they explain the data they have gotten from the experiment? Of course, by using the formula from capture-recapture technique that can be used to estimate the total population of the grasshopper. So that is how IBSE works in today's classroom, which is they want the student to question about the problems. They want the student to communicate with each other on how to solve the problem. The third one is they want the student to explore the problem and find the best ever solution for the problem. And finally, they must conclude what they have learned about the problem. Okay, on this next slide, I will be explaining on the differences of traditional science, IBSE, and the 21st century. I will do some comparison between traditional science, IBSE, and 21st century. So let's look at the first one, which is the traditional science. The first point is to memorize and organize the facts. The second point is to transmit a series of unchanging facts from the teachers to the student. And the final point is teachers only relate facts to the student. Okay, let me explain to you by giving some example. So, imagine I am the teacher that use traditional science method. So, as the teacher, I will be teaching about global warming to the student. I will only explain about what is global warming, what are the causes, and what are the effects of global warming. That is all. And I want the student to memorize these 3 points, these 3 main topics, which is to define what is global warming, explain what are the causes and what are the effects. That is all. They memorize the knowledge and use it in the examination. And the knowledge or the facts that I have been teach to the student are the same facts that I have learned from my previous teacher, and there is no improvement about the topic. So that is how traditional science works. Now let's look at IBSE. So the first point from IBSE is they apply student-centered approach. The second point is they focus more on questioning and problem solving. And the last point is they learn about the facts rather than receive the fact from the teachers. So as you can see right here, there is a large and huge difference between IBSE and traditional science. Which the first one that I see is the student in IBSE are using student-centered approach, which means the teachers act as the facilitator, while in traditional science they don't use student-centered approach. They only focus on the teacher because their teachers is their source of knowledge. This is because in IBSE the student explore the problems and solve the problem by doing lots of discussion, exploration, communication between their friends to solve the problem, while in traditional science the teachers give the answer directly on how to solve the problem. The second point, the second differences between IBSE and traditional science is in IBSE they learn the facts rather than receive the fact from the teacher. This is what I said before. The teachers in traditional science is the student's source of knowledge, and while the student in IBSE, they are the source of knowledge if they continue to communicate, explore, and conclude what they have learned about the topic, and finally solve about the problem in those topics. After that, let's look at the 21st century. The first point from the 21st century is they use lots of critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, and communication. The second point is they need to focus more on building reasoning skill in life. While the final point from the 21st century is they learn through doing by using suitable technologies. So as you can see right here, there are some differences and I see some similarities between IBSE and 21st century that can be used into this class. So the first differences between these two is the technology itself, because in the 21st century classroom they use lots of technology that can improve the student critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, and also the communication between the students. The second differences between these two is the approach that they use, which is IBSE focus on the question and the problem solving, while in 21st century they focus more on building reasoning skill in their life. So that is the differences between traditional science, IBSE, and 21st century classroom. Now let's move on to the last part of my part, which is on how IBSE is constructed. So IBSE is constructed by looking at 3 points, which is the first point is looking at the teacher's preparation, the second one is preparing teaching materials, and the third point is elements required to design an IBSE program. But the element required is classified into 3 parts, which is the first one is the attitude of the school authorities, the minimum requirement for the school, and the resource center. And that is all for me. Thank you for watching.
We proceed to the levels of IBSE. Confirmation, structure, guided and open inquiry are the 4 levels of inquiry-based science education. Firstly, confirmation inquiry. Confirmation inquiry is required at the start of implementation because it involves the confirmation and verification of laws and theories. The teacher's goals are to help students develop their observational, experimental and analytical skills. When conducting the experiment, the student will follow the teacher's instruction. For structure inquiry, teachers help students by asking questions and also provide the guidance. They control the lesson procedure which should be followed, question to be asked and the making of decisions. The students are looking for solution using their inquiry and explains the answer based on the evidence obtained. The detail of the experiments are prepared by the teachers, but they seek for the solution themselves. It is a very important stage because it develops the potential of students to perform high level of inquiry. In the third level of inquiry, which is guided inquiry, teachers play less role to guide the students where they cooperate with students to define research questions and give opinions on procedure to be implemented by the student themselves. This will increase the level of confidence of the student so that they can work independently to seek for the solutions. One study found that guided inquiry is more compatible with constructivist learning and produce more effective learning output than other type of inquiry. Meanwhile, during an open inquiry, a question to be asked, methods or procedure to be followed and decision to be made are some of the process that will be experienced by the students. This is the higher level of scientific research. This stage requires a higher level of scientific thinking and cognitive ability, and it is only applicable to certain type of student. So, based on the 4 levels of inquiry, it is possible to conclude that the level of student-generated inquiry and responsibility increase as students progress along the continuum. Following that, the diagram and the table shows other summarization of the IBSE's 4 levels. Then, we move on to the implementation of IBSE and the development model. As you can see, there are 2 learning cycle development model, which are the 5E learning cycle and the 7E learning cycle. Priors believe that textbook-based science education alone did not provide students of any age with the integration of conceptual understanding of the process skills known as scientific reasoning. As a result, they created this model to help in the teaching and learning process in the classroom. The 5E model, which consists of 5 components, is one of many instructional approach that support inquiry-based science learning. Roger Bybee, one of pioneers of biological science curriculum studies (BSCS), created the 5Es instructional model for constructivism. Students attempt to make sense of things by drawing on prior experience as well as first-hand knowledge gained from new exploration. According to the National Research Council 2000, the 5E learning cycle is not only an inquiry-based teaching approach, but it is also a constructivist-oriented strategy in which students participate in experimenting, questioning and investigating problem. This model provides more opportunities for students to develop their understanding of a concept during the teaching and learning process. In the engagement phase with inquiry months, the attraction of students is initiated by the teachers to make them curious about the concept that will be learned. Teachers have more opportunities to understand the knowledge and idea processed by the students that can be developed. Teachers can invite students to construct their own question about the process of scientific inquiry. During the exploration phase involving working with questions and interaction of the students with the material and ideas through classroom as well as small group discussion is formed. Students can construct their understanding by observing, recording, describing, comparing as well as sharing their experience and ideas with others. In the explanation phase, involving conducting a scientific investigation, an opportunity is provided to the student to connect their previous experience with current learning. They can gain the main ideas of the module. The student can be involved in student-to-student discourse where they can explain their ideas before debating with others. Student previous experience can be described easily by the introduction of formal language, terminology, scientific terms and content information. The elaboration phase involving extension of conducting a scientific investigation and opportunity is also provided for the student to apply introduced concept to new experience. It enhances the use of scientific terms and description of the student. They can draw or make a conclusion from evidence and data obtained. Not only they can deepen their understanding of concept and process, but also can interact with others by discussing their understanding of the problem. Meanwhile, during the evaluation phase, the process of pulling it all together is placed centrally in the module where it provides a summative assessment of what students know and can do. Students can assess their progress by comparing their current understanding with previous knowledge. We move forward to the 7E learning cycle. 7E learning cycle is an extension of 5E model where its objective is to ensure teachers do not leave out any important instructional components. Craft 2003 proposed elicit, engage, explore, explain, elaborate, evaluate and extend that makes up the 7E components. The main aim of this model is to highlight the importance of previous understanding and transfer it into a new concept. Osman 2004 emphasized that the 7E model was considered to be effective and could encourage students to participate in learning sessions actively, assist them to conduct research properly, encourage the exchange of ideas or communications, and also enhance the problem-solving skill. This module also able to give an opportunity for teachers to easily evaluate their students. In 7E model, the engage phase in 5E model is extended into elicit and engage phase. Each explanation of every phase in 7E model are described as first, engage. Engage is the stage where motivation and interest of the student being developed. This helps the student to focus on a problem and current situation properly. Second, explore. Explore phase requires some skill of scientific research where students are given time to conduct experiment and opportunity for skills development. Third, explain. In explain stage, students need to collaborate with others for acceptance or rejection of hypotheses they suggested. To consider whether the models should be accepted or not, teachers need to provide specific explanation for the student to understand. Fourth, elaborate. In elaborate stage, students need to conduct an experiment to test their new concept. Therefore, students can develop their knowledge and skill of the concept before application takes place. 5. Evaluate. In evaluate stage, students try to find answers from the data and evidence they obtain. The evaluation by the teachers take place formally, and it is very important to give feedback to the students' performance. Sixth, which is extend. This stage needs the student to relate their existing concept with real life so that they can transfer their knowledge and skill obtained confidently. And the seventh, which is the last stage, which is elicit. Elicit is the presentation of data and graph that are necessary for the student so that they can form a discussion group to share their new findings. Then we continue with the inquiry-based science teaching method. There are 5 inquiry-based science teaching methods, namely simulation, field study, experiment, project work, and demonstration. Firstly, simulation. Simulation is in inquiry-based science teaching consists of role play, games, and model. Simulation using a model is a type of experiential learning. It is an instructional scenario in which the learner is placed in a world created by the teacher. During simulation, the learner will interact in such a way that they are the test subject in the lab experiment. This strategy adheres to the constructivist principle and is an effective method of assisting students in comprehending the nuances of a concept or condition. Next, a field study is an academic or under-investigative study that is conducted in a natural setting rather than in laboratories, classroom, or other structured settings. Field study not only allows students to actively engage with one another, but it also helps in the development of an understanding of the experience and process of learning in natural settings. They were also able to develop continuity between theory and reality through discussion on classroom lessons and relating those to their home life and other outdoor experience. Other benefits of field trips include that the fact that students and teachers enjoy the activity, that learning was more real and challenging than in the classroom, and that learning activities and environment promote aspects of discovery, open discussion, and the freedom to choose how to find and record information deemed more beneficial. Then, experimentation is at the heart of scientific investigation in the classroom. Teachers typically conduct experiments in order to pique student interest in learning science through provisions. Students frequently come across opportunities to manipulate objects, test hypotheses, and collaborate to solve or prove something exciting. Furthermore, through experiments, students are usually able to better see or relate concepts, thus contributing to sound scientific concept. In inquiry-based science education, the project approach focuses on the work assigned by the teachers or students to complete in group. A group should ideally have no more than 3 students, and the group is required to create a project for their discovery content purpose. Previous research has shown that project work benefits students in a variety of ways. First, it allows for more meaningful understanding of science concepts among students. Second, it improves students' academic performance. And lastly, it allows learners to engage in the process of evaluating science content to be learned, anticipating how that knowledge will be used, and applying the science content in authentic situations. Lastly, demonstration is extremely beneficial in promoting student learning by proving the existence or truth of something through evidence. Despite the fact that teachers must put in a lot of effort to design, set up, and think of the best way to carry out demonstration, the end result can be extremely positive. Furthermore, lecture demonstration can become an important component of overall teaching strategy, providing a concrete, visual way to help explain a topic. Next, we move forward in the assessment of IBSE. In IBSE, there are two types of assessment, which are formative assessment and summative assessment. For formative assessment, the purpose of formative assessment is to monitor student learning and provide ongoing feedback to staff and students. It is assessment for learning. It helps students identify their strength and weakness, can enable students to improve their self-regulatory skill. Formative assessment can be tutor-led, peer or self-assessment. Next, for the summative assessment. The goal of summative assessment is to evaluate student learning at the end of an instructional unit by comparing it against some standard or benchmark. It is assessment of learning. However, feedback from summative assessment can be used formatively by both students and faculty to guide their effort and activities in subsequent courses. Carry on to the teacher's personal role in IBSE. There are many teachers' personal role in IBSE, such as motivators, take responsibility for their own learning, didactician, to express ideas to discern their understanding, guide, directing students to develop strategies, mentor, learning about scientific work, collaborator, exchange of ideas, students to become the teachers, experimenter, trying out new ways to teach and access, researcher, evaluating on teaching and engaging in problem solving, learner, opening oneself to learning new concept, and the last one is innovator, designing instruction by using new ideas. So that's all from me. Thank you.
I am Zainey Azneyra. I will continue on challenges in implementing IBSE. First of all, IBSE consumes a lot of time. Because of this, some content would have to be sacrificed. Next, IBSE will trigger confusion among students due to complexity of inquiry. It will also presenting doubts and array of alternatives to choose will only bewilder them. Not just that, most of the teachers also are lacking of training on how to implementing IBSE in science classroom, and they have little idea of how IBSE works in science classroom. So, teachers are depending fully on textbook and focuses on examination requirements. There are also limited resources of IBSE for the teachers to refer. Teachers do not have enough references to refer about what, how, and why IBSE is crucial in science classroom. Besides, nowadays, most industries are looking for particular skills in hiring employee. These job requirements needed in the industry become one of the challenges in implementing IBSE. Last but not least, IBSE is too costly to implement in everyday classroom. Some IBSE activities requires a high cost, and the school could not provide the whole cost. Now, let us continue to find out more about the effects of inquiry-based approaches to teaching and learning that can inspire us as future teachers in our own classroom. Did you know that IBSE can increase rigor and cognitive load? Inquiry-based learning pushes students beyond simply learning to memorize or remember, and toward applying knowledge in new domains, drawing connections among ideas, evaluating or challenging ideas, and even creating something completely new. Second, IBSE increases intellectual risk-taking. In inquiry-based learning, it connects a new concept or area of study with students' own interests and lived experience. In this way, this methodology awakens their natural curiosity, increasing engagement in learning experiences that are more relevant to students' lives. Third, it also increased engagement and interest among students. Inquiry-based learning experiences push students out of their comfort zone because it focuses more on exploring environments of varying levels of ambiguity. It lowers the perceived need to get it right that would otherwise make students wary of intellectual risk-taking. IBSE also developed key soft skills. Inquiry-based learning also effectively develops important soft skills that are key for student success in 21st century, such as creative problem solving, critical thinking, logical thinking, teamwork, and even written and oral communication. Furthermore, IBSE transformed a classroom of students into a classroom of teachers. Inquiry-based teaching can easily be combined with collaborative groupings that will allow students to work and learn as team. With clearly set expectations and fully defined roles, students explore, discuss, and come up with creative ways to approach a complex task, learning more as a team than they would individually. Often, peer learning is just as effective as teacher-led learning. Other than that, IBSE is a source of self-confidence. It allows students to embrace and feel comfortable with the possibility of making errors, making it rather an opportunity for improvement. Indeed, by challenging them to find solutions based on their own knowledge and experience, this learning approach will empower students to increase their self-confidence and to freely experiment, focusing on the inquiry itself rather than the fear of being wrong. Inquiry creates lifelong learners. Life is about learning to navigate unfamiliar situations and coming up with creative solutions in environments of uncertainty will help students to find success not only in their current academic careers, but will also help them to adapt a workforce and world that will continue to evolve in unexpected ways. Last but not least, IBSE triggers new approaches to solve a new type of problem. We need to enable the next generations today to face the world of tomorrow with a more dynamic and innovative way of thinking about problems. And this is what inquiry-based learning teaches them to do by triggering their critical thinking capacities and pushing them to take action instead of learning passively.